Good evening, or afternoon, or morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a topic in Blender that some of you have actually already discovered by accident in class. We're going to talk about adding a particle system to our objects. So I'm going to dive right in. The one thing you're going to find about particle systems is that there are a lot of different settings that we can look at. I'm going to cover a few of them in the video today, but I'm also going to put the PowerPoint on eBackpack so that you guys have an opportunity to see some more complete descriptions of the particle settings that we have access to. So what we're going to do today is take a look at how a particle setting can be applied to the sphere and what some of the things we can change about it are. Our end goal is to make an explosion from this sphere, kind of like we're making fireworks. So to start, we want to take a look at this section of the button bar in our properties panel. These sets of little stars are the particle settings. So now that I'm there, I'm going to click New, and it adds what is called a particle system. Now, without actually running anything, let's try and see what the default settings look like. So by default, a particle setting is going to create particles. It basically takes our object, our sphere, and it produces particles from them. Now we have some things we're going to change because right now this doesn't really look like an exploding firecracker. It looks like it's raining or if there's pieces shedding off of it, and we want to change that. So let's take a look at some of the basic settings that we have access to. If I collapse some of these guys, you'll see that we have settings for a whole bunch of stuff. Emission, cache, velocity, rotation, physics, render. There's all kinds of different settings here, and we're going to break these down into maybe 4 or 5 things that we want to look at. We're not going to use all of these, and you may go through your entire Blender experience having not used all of them. But they are there if we need them. So we're going to start with the Emission tab. Emissions controls exactly how many particles get produced by the object. Now, hopefully this is clear, but the more particles that we create, the slower or harder of a time Blender will have rendering them. So let's break down what this emission panel actually says. The first thing here is the number. This is the number of particles produced by the emitter. I'm going to drop this from 1,000 to 300 so that we can see a difference here. You can see that a lot less particles are given off now. And this is good. If we don't need a lot of particles, then this is really good to increase our rendering time. So I'm going to leave mine at 300 for now. Also notice that we're controlling the color of the particles. Let's render this real quick. We're controlling the color of the particles by the material on the sphere. The sphere is blue, so the particles will be blue. So the particle color can all be changed in the material settings. Okay, so we've got 300 particles that we are emitting. The 3 other values that we want to take a look at are start, end, and lifetime. Start and end are frame numbers. They mark how long in the animation my emission is going to last. So this particle system begins at frame 1 and ends at frame 200. That's why we see particles get sent out for a good portion of the time, but then they suddenly stop. What we want to do is change this so all the particles come out very quickly. So I'm going to change my start frame to 50, and I'm going to change my end frame to 52. And then a whole bunch of particles are going to be given off in a very short period of time. So let's take a look at that. We've got 300 particles all being emitted between frame 50 and frame 52. And there we go. We get particles that are shed from our sphere all at once and then drop. So we're getting a little bit closer to a firecracker because it's a very short amount of time. The other thing that we want to look at here is the lifetime. So the lifetime represents how many frames the particles will exist after they come out of the sphere. So for example, if I drop this dramatically, if I drop this to 5 frames, let's take a look at what that looks like. Stuff pops out and then disappears. Check it one more time in case you didn't see it. They pop out at frame 50, and then 5 frames later, they disappear. So lifetime controls at what point the particles vanish. The longer the lifetime, the longer the particles hang out in our scene. Okay, so those settings look pretty good for now. Let's put emission away. Remember, we control the number and when they start and end from here. Let's move on to the velocity panel. The velocity panel has a couple of different things that we could look at. But the big thing that we care about are these x, y, z values right here and the normal value. So normal represents the speed at which the particles fly out of our object. If we increase the normal, then we end up with a much bigger push in our particles. Think about the explosive force of this object. The higher we raise normal, the more explosive this thing's going to be. So we're going to change normal from 1 to 3 to see what happens. And then x, y, and z would allow us to push the particles in a specific direction. So if I only wanted the particles to shoot, for example, upwards, then I might increase the z force and the particles would go up instead of evenly spread out to the side. But let's see how this changes our object by changing it to 3. We can see that everything got pushed much farther out. Let's take a look one more time. You guys can see it. The particles clear a much bigger space because the normal force has been increased. Let's try increasing y dramatically. Let's make that a lot of force and see if that changes anything. Okay, so we can see that not only, let's watch it again, not only did the particles explode outward, they exploded in the y direction, right? They exploded along the green axis because I increased the y value. So we can modify exactly which way these things go by using those velocity settings. So emission controls how many particles, how long they're alive for. Velocity concerns where they fly. Okay. Let's talk very briefly about rotation. Rotation allows us to add some randomness to our particles. So if we were to check this off, our phase and random values control how the particles spin. By changing these, the particles will be much more random. Let's take a look here and see if we can see a difference. We should be able to. Now, it's in such a short amount of time that maybe we won't. Let's try increasing the phase. All right, we're not seeing much because, go back to our emissions, this is taking too short of a time. Let's try it again and see what happens. There we go. So now we're getting stuff a little bit more sporadic, and that is because of our random setting. I'm going to drop this back to what we had it. We're not too concerned about this tab today, but just know that it's there if you want to change how your particles act. The last section, or the last couple of sections, though, that we care about for creating an explosion are the render settings and the field weights settings. So let's take a look at render first. Render has a few checkbox options here that determine what we show on our object. So for example, notice that emitter is checked. The emitter is the thing that's actually giving off the particles, in this case our sphere. If we uncheck the emitter, then it won't show up when we render it. Now, if we think about fireworks, fireworks don't look like a big ball in the sky. They explode out from seemingly nothing, right? So for our fireworks, we want to leave the emitter unchecked, and that way we won't see our sphere when the final rendering is done. So if we go back, I want to get us just about to frame right there. Let's see what that looks like. We can see now that when we render it, these particles are going to explode out like as if they were coming from a single point. So we're not going to have to worry about seeing the sphere in the scene with emitter unchecked. The other one is unborn and died. These show off particles either before they've been shot out or after they have died. We usually want to leave these unchecked, but if for some reason you wanted to see the particles before they were created, then we would change these settings. The last little interesting thing here is we can change the look of the particle. Right now it's a halo particle, meaning we have all these tiny little chunks that explode outward. If I change this to line, it's going to change the shape. Oh, I don't want to go backwards. I want to go forward. It's going to change the shape of my particle. Explodes out as a line. Let's check out frame 52. Oh, nope, sorry. That's not what I want to do. I want to set my current frame 52. Let's see what that looks like as a render. We can see here that they're coming out as these straight lines rather than the halo particles. And we could change these in many different ways. We can have path, object, group. Object means we can define another object that comes out as an emission. That's obviously much more complicated, but it does work. Okay, the last thing that we want to change about our fireworks. These fireworks look really weird because they fall super fast. They explode out and then fall very, very quickly. So we want to change the gravity of our particles. And that is controlled under the field weights panel. So this is the last thing. Let's do a really brief recap. Emission is the number of particles and when they are alive. Velocity is how much they explode. Rotation introduces randomness, and render allows us to say what things are shown on the screen and what things are not. Field weights give us a bunch of options for the forces that act on our particles, but the only one that we care about is gravity. Gravity at 1 means that it's going to behave like normal Earth gravity. We're going to change this to 0.4 and see how it changes our particles' explosion. Now they appear to fall much more slowly. The particles appear to be much lighter. And it looks a little bit more like a firecracker, because when the particles explode from a firecracker, those little bits of shrapnel and light are very, very light, almost weightless, and they kind of spread out. So that's what we're emulating here. And we can experiment with that gravity if we want to. If we put no gravity, let's see what that looks like. With no gravity, the particles just shoot out from one another, and they just go in straight lines, right? Because there's nothing pulling them down. So gravity is a great way to change the falling behavior of our particles. And you guys can experiment with that. So you're going to be making these sorts of particle settings in your activity in class. There's one more I want to show you real quick. We can also use particles. I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to bring this plane up here. And I'm also going to scale this plane up a little bit. So if we look in our camera, we can't actually see the plane. But I want to add a particle system to this plane. I am going to make the particle system, gravity's fine. I am going to make the particle system lines, and I'm going to decrease their tail to 0.2, and let's see what happens here. So here, I'm creating something that kind of looks like rain, and I'm going to go into emissions, and I'm going to change the N to 250. I'm going to start it over. So we can use particle settings to make rain as well. We can use particle settings really for any number of things. The idea here is that explosions, sparks, rain, even gas, we can simulate using a particle system. And we're going to experiment with particle systems a little bit more later on, but these are the systems that are in place. If any of you guys have experimented with quick smoke or quick explode, those are what are actually, particle systems are what are actually being put into place. It's just that quick explode and quick smoke know how to create a pre-built particle system very quickly. We're learning how to customize our own particle systems. So there you go. Hopefully this will allow you to add some interesting effects to your final project, which we will be discussing soon. Thanks for watching.